She said she taught kids English. She said they looked up to her. I brought school supplies, paid their tuition, funded field trips. I was proud to help, until I heard one of them whisper, "Here comes the foreigner ATM." I stood in that doorway with a plastic bag of coloring books and pencils, watching a dozen kids run to Trishelle like she was their mother coming home from war. The humid air in that little classroom stuck to my shirt, but I didn't care. I'd never seen anything so pure. "Miss Trishelle, Miss Trishelle," they shouted, wrapping their thin arms around her waist. She laughed, ruffling their hair, speaking to them in rapid Tagalog that sounded like music. Then she looked at me standing there like some awkward giant and smiled that smile that had been keeping me awake at night for 3 weeks. "Kids, this is Uncle Harlin from America," she said, her voice warm and proud. "He brought you something special." The clapping started immediately. 24 little hands making thunder in that tiny room. A girl with pigtails ran up and hugged my leg. I almost lost it right there. When was the last time anyone had hugged me? When was the last time I'd felt like I mattered? "Thank you, Uncle Harlin," they chorused, and I swear my chest tightened so hard I thought I might break down crying right in front of them. Trishelle walked over, took the bag from my hands, and whispered, "You see, you make them so happy." Her fingers brushed mine, and for a moment, I forgot I was a 68-year-old man who'd spent the last 3 years talking to nobody but grocery clerks back in Mississippi. I watched her distribute the supplies, the way she knelt down to their level, the way she made sure every child got exactly what they needed. "Maria, you love purple, don't you? Here's the purple crayon. Carlos, I know you like dinosaurs. Look, there's a T-Rex in this coloring book." She knew them. She cared about them. And somehow, through her, I was part of something that mattered. Something that wasn't just an old man's pension checks and empty rooms. "We don't get visitors often," she had told me the day before. "Most foreigners just want to party in Manila or Cebu. You're different, Harlin. You see the real Philippines." Standing there, watching her teach those kids how to properly hold a crayon, I believed every word. I belonged here. I was helping. For the first time since Martha died, I felt alive. When the kids started coloring, she walked back to me and slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means to them. To me." Her thumb traced across my knuckles, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd found my reason for getting up in the morning again. I met her 3 months earlier at a cafe in San Juan, bent over a stack of papers with a red pen in her mouth. She was correcting homework, or so I thought. When I knocked over my coffee, trying to sit down, she looked up and smiled instead of rolling her eyes like most people would have. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked, already reaching for napkins. Her English was perfect, barely touched by an accent. "Just clumsy," I said, feeling my face burn with embarrassment. "Sorry about the mess." But she was already cleaning it up, waving off my apologies. "No problem at all. American?" she asked, and when I nodded, she said, "I love American culture. I teach English to kids here." She gestured to her papers. "Lesson plans for tomorrow." That's how it started. Coffee shop conversations about books, about teaching, about the differences between Mississippi and the Philippines. She called me Sir Harlin at first, which made me feel distinguished instead of old. "Just Harlin is fine," I'd tell her, but she'd smile and say, "Respect is important here, Sir Harlin." She told me about her dream of becoming a certified teacher, about the children who couldn't afford proper schools, about wanting to make a difference. I'd been living in the Philippines for 6 months by then, trying to stretch my postal worker's pension and forget about the emptiness Martha's cancer had left behind. Most days, I sat on my rented apartment balcony wondering what the hell I was doing so far from home. Then Trishelle started showing up at the same cafe every Tuesday and Thursday, always with those lesson plans, always asking about my day like it actually mattered. The night everything changed, we were sharing fried bangus at a street vendor's cart. The fish was too salty, the plastic chairs were too small for my frame, but she was laughing at something I'd said about Mississippi mosquitoes. Suddenly, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was soft, warm. "You make me feel safe, Harlin," she said, and her voice was different, quieter, more serious. "Safe?" I asked, my heart doing things it hadn't done in years. She nodded, looking down at our joined hands. "Most men here, They want things from women. You just want to talk. You listen to me talk about teaching, about my dreams. You don't make me feel like I have to be something I'm not." When she looked up, her eyes were shining. "Is it strange that I like being with someone older, someone who knows who he is? Strange? Hell, it felt like winning the lottery. I was falling for a girl 44 years younger than me, and she was telling me I made her feel safe. Not her father. Not her brother. Me. The postal worker from Tupelo who'd never been anywhere or done anything worth talking about. "It's not strange," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's the best thing that's happened to me in 3 years." Trishelle never asked for anything directly. She was too proud for that, too considerate. Instead, she'd mention things in passing, like a butterfly landing on your shoulder before floating away. "Some of the children don't have notebooks," she'd say over breakfast, stirring her coffee absently. "I try to share mine, but there's only so much paper to go around." Then she'd change the subject, ask about my day, laugh at my stories about delivering mail in Mississippi heat. But I couldn't stop thinking about those kids without notebooks. The girl with pigtails who'd hugged my leg, the boy who'd been so careful with his purple crayon. What if I bought them some supplies? I offered the next day. "I mean, notebooks aren't expensive, right?" Trishelle's face lit up, then immediately clouded with concern. "Oh, Harlin, I couldn't ask you to do that. You've already been so generous with your time." "You didn't ask," I said, reaching for her hand across the table. "I'm offering. These kids matter to you, which means they matter to me." She squeezed my fingers, and I saw tears in her eyes. "You are such a good man," she whispered. "They would be so happy." That became our pattern. She'd mention something, pencils running low, a student who might have to drop out because his family couldn't afford the small enrollment fee, kids missing snack money, and I'd find a way to help. It felt natural, like breathing. I hadn't had anyone to take care of since Martha got sick, and here was Trishelle, giving me a whole classroom of children to look after. "The kids ask about you when you're not there," she told me one evening as we walked along the beach. "They call you Uncle Harlin who brings gifts. Yesterday, Maria drew you a picture. She made you very tall, with a big smile." She showed me the drawing on her phone, a stick figure man with yellow hair surrounded by smaller stick figures with hearts floating above them. I nearly cried right there on the sand. "They need you more than I do," she said, stopping to face me. The sunset turned her skin golden, made her look like something from a dream. "You give them hope, Harlin. You show them that there are good people in the world who care about kids like them." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed my cheek. "You make me proud to know you." Pride. When was the last time someone had been proud of me? At the post office, I was just another guy sorting mail for 37 years. In Mississippi, after Martha died, I was just the widower people felt sorry for. But here, through Trishelle's eyes, I was Uncle Harlin, who brought supplies and hope. I was someone worth being proud of. "Whatever they need," I said, meaning it completely. "Just tell me what they need." I wanted to surprise her. That was my only thought that Tuesday morning when I decided to show up an hour early at the community center. I'd bought a box of new crayons, the big 64 pack with the built-in sharpener, and I couldn't wait to see the kids' faces when they opened it. The morning was already hot, sticky with humidity, but I was practically bouncing as I walked up the dirt path to the small building. Through the window, I could see 3 teenagers inside, older than the usual kids in Trishelle's class. They were laughing, not the innocent giggles I was used to hearing, but something sharper, more knowing. I slowed down, not wanting to interrupt what looked like a private conversation. That's when I heard it. "ATM na naman si kuya foreigner," one of them said, nudging his friend with his elbow. The others erupted in laughter. I didn't understand all the words, but I knew enough. ATM. Automatic teller machine. Foreigner. The pieces clicked together in my chest like a lock snapping shut. Trishelle was there too, sitting at the small teacher's desk. She should have corrected them. She should have said something about respect or kindness. Instead, she smiled, not her warm, gentle smile, but something smaller, tighter, like she was trying not to laugh too. "Shh," she said, but it sounded more like she was worried about being overheard than actually disapproving. I stood there frozen, holding my box of crayons like some kind of fool. My face burned. My hands shook. These weren't little kids who didn't know better. These were teenagers who saw right through everything I thought I was doing here. To them, I wasn't Uncle Harlin who cared about education. I wasn't Trichelle's boyfriend who wanted to help. I was just another foreign ATM, dispensing money whenever someone pushed the right buttons. When I finally pushed open the door, the laughter stopped immediately. All three teens looked at the floor, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. Trichelle jumped up from her desk, her face shifting so quickly back to that warm smile that I wondered if I'd imagined the other expression entirely. "Harlin," she said, walking over to hug me like nothing had happened. "You're early today. How wonderful." Her arms felt the same around me, her voice carried the same affection, but something inside me had cracked. Something I couldn't quite name yet. "I brought more supplies," I said, holding up the crayon box. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and distant. The teenagers mumbled polite thank yous without making eye contact. Trichelle praised my generosity, talked about how much the children would love the new colors, kissed my cheek with the same tenderness as always. But I couldn't stop hearing that word, ATM. Couldn't stop seeing that knowing smile on her face before she noticed me watching. Couldn't stop wondering how many times they'd said it before. How many times they'd all laughed about the old American man who showed up with gifts and walked away feeling important. I waited until we were alone that night, back at my apartment with the fan rattling overhead and the street noise filtering through the thin walls. Trichelle was making tea, humming softly like she always did when she was happy. The domesticity of it, the comfortable routine we'd built together, made what I had to say feel even heavier. "Do they really think I'm just an ATM?" I asked. The words came out rougher than I intended. Trichelle's humming stopped. She set down the tea kettle and turned to face me, her expression shifting from contentment to confusion to something that looked almost like irritation. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice cooler than I'd ever heard it. "Why would you say something like that?" I told her about the teenagers, about what I'd heard, about the way she'd smiled before she saw me. With each word, her face grew more closed off, more defensive. "You're being paranoid, Harlin," she said, crossing her arms. "Those kids were probably talking about something completely different. You don't understand Tagalog very well." But I knew what I'd heard. I knew what ATM meant. I knew the difference between innocent laughter and the other kind. "I'm not stupid, Trichelle," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know what they said. I just want to know if that's really how they see me. How you see me." The hurt in my voice was obvious, naked. I was giving her a chance to explain, to make it right, to prove that what we had was real. Instead, she snapped. "You're embarrassing me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "I work with those kids. I have to maintain relationships with them. And now you're going to make everything awkward because you're insecure about your age." Each word hit like a slap. This wasn't the gentle, caring woman I'd fallen for. This was someone else entirely. "I'm not insecure," I started, but she cut me off. "Yes, you are. You're making problems where there aren't any. You're accusing me of things I would never do." Her voice cracked, and suddenly there were tears in her eyes. Real tears, or at least they looked real. "I thought you trusted me, Harlin. I thought you understood what we have together." The guilt hit me like a truck. Here she was, crying because I'd questioned her integrity, because I'd let paranoia and jealousy poison something beautiful. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching for her. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just—" She pulled away from my touch, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You just what? You just decided that everyone here is trying to use you? That I'm trying to use you?" She shook her head, looking at me like I was a stranger. "Maybe you should go back to America if that's really what you think of us. Of me." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I felt smaller than I had in years, ashamed of my suspicions, ashamed of hurting her. "That's not what I think," I said quietly. "I love you, Trichelle. I love what we're doing with the kids. I just got scared when I heard them laughing." She softened slightly, allowing me to pull her into a hug. "I know you love me," she whispered against my chest. "But you have to trust me too. Those kids look up to you. They see how much you care, how much you give. Don't let your fears ruin something so beautiful." I held her tighter, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, telling myself she was right. I was being paranoid. I was ruining everything good in my life because I couldn't believe someone like her could love someone like me. The bamboo bar wasn't much to look at. Plastic chairs, warm beer, a ceiling fan that squeaked with every rotation. But it was where the expats gathered to complain about the heat and swap stories about life in the Philippines. I'd been avoiding it for months, not wanting to become one of those bitter old men nursing grudges over cheap alcohol. But after the fight with Trishelle, after 3 days of her being politely distant, I needed to be around people who spoke English without having to think about every word. Pete was sitting alone at a corner table, a British guy in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. We'd nodded at each other around town but never talked. Tonight felt different. Tonight I needed conversation that didn't require walking on eggshells. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Course not, mate," he said, signaling the bartender for another round. "You're the American from Mississippi, right? Been seeing you around town with that local girl." He paused, studying my face. "Everything all right? You look like someone stole your dog." I wasn't planning to tell him anything. These kinds of conversations usually ended with judgment or advice I didn't want to hear. But the beer was cold, Pete's accent was comforting in its familiarity, and I was tired of carrying the weight of my doubts alone. "Just trying to figure out if I'm being played," I said. Pete's expression changed, became more focused. "The girl you're with, tall, pretty, always carrying a notebook, hair usually in a ponytail with a little ribbon?" The specificity of his description made my stomach clench. I nodded. He sighed, taking a long pull from his beer. "What's her name?" he asked quietly. "Trishelle," I said. "She teaches English to kids at a community center." Pete's face darkened. He looked around the bar, making sure we weren't being overheard, then leaned forward. "Mate," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I hate to be the one to tell you this, but she used to sit at this very bar with a guy from Denmark. Eric was his name. Older fellow, probably around your age. Same story. She was a teacher, needed help with supplies for her kids, the whole thing." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "That was almost a year ago," Pete continued. "Eric was head over heels, talked about her constantly, how sweet she was, how much she cared about education, how lucky he felt to find someone so genuine. Then one day, he was gone, just disappeared. Someone said he went back to Denmark, but he left in a hurry. Didn't say goodbye to anyone." I sat there staring at my beer, feeling the world shift beneath me. "You sure it was the same girl?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Pete nodded grimly. "Same notebook, same story about teaching, same way of making a man feel special. She's good at it, I'll give her that." "How good?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Pete finished his beer and signaled for another. "Good enough that Eric sent money back to Denmark to his son, told him he was investing in a school here, helping disadvantaged children. Good enough that 3 different men I know have mentioned dating a teacher who looks exactly like your Trishelle over the past 2 years." The air in the bar suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I thought about all the supplies I'd bought, all the fees I'd paid, all the times Trishelle had mentioned the children's needs with just the right amount of hesitation. I thought about how she'd never directly asked for money but had made it impossible for me not to offer. "I'm sorry, mate," Pete said, reading my face. "I've been debating whether to say anything for weeks. Didn't want to ruin something good if I was wrong. But seeing you tonight, looking like you've been questioning things yourself." He shrugged helplessly. "Sometimes the kindest thing is the truth, even when it hurts." The next afternoon, I told Trishelle I was feeling under the weather and needed to rest. She was all concern and tenderness, bringing me tea, kissing my forehead, promising to check on me later. "Take care of yourself," she said, her eyes soft with what looked like genuine worry. "I'll stop by after I finish with the kids today." I waited 20 minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys. I'd never followed anyone before, never been the kind of man who checked up on his partner's stories. But Pete's words had planted something in my chest that grew bigger with every heartbeat. I needed to see where she actually went. I needed to prove to myself that my suspicions were wrong. I found her 3 blocks away from the community center, walking into a beauty salon called Glamour Girls. Through the window, I watched her hug the woman behind the counter like they were old friends. She wasn't carrying her notebook. She wasn't dressed like a teacher heading to work. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her hair down and styled, makeup more carefully applied than usual. I sat in my car across the street, feeling like a stalker and hating myself for it. Maybe she had an appointment before work. Maybe she was getting ready for something special. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that wouldn't shatter everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. 2 hours later, she emerged with her hair professionally styled and her nails freshly painted. But instead of heading to the community center, she walked to the mall. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and dread. At the department store, she met a man I'd never seen before, younger than me, better dressed, with the confident posture of someone who belonged in places like this. They weren't holding hands, but they were walking close together. Too close. The way couples walk when they're comfortable with each other, when they don't need to perform intimacy because it's already understood. I watched them browse clothes together, watched her laugh at something he said, watched him pay for a shirt while she stood beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't confront her, didn't storm over and demand explanations. Instead, I walked back to my car and sat there for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, feeling something inside me die, not just my trust in Trishelle, but my trust in my own judgment. How had I been so blind? How had I confused performance for authenticity so completely? The drive home was a blur of traffic and heat, and the growing realization that everything Pete had told me was true. Trishelle wasn't a teacher struggling to help disadvantaged children. She was a woman who found lonely foreign men and gave them exactly what they needed to hear. And I'd been so hungry for purpose, so desperate to matter to someone, that I'd swallowed every word. When she showed up at my apartment that evening, full of concern about my health and stories about her day with the children, I just nodded and smiled. I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet. I wasn't ready for the lies that would follow, the tears, the accusations that I was paranoid and jealous. I needed time to figure out how to extract myself from this without losing what little dignity I had left. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, listening to Trishelle breathe beside me. She slept peacefully, one arm draped across my chest like she owned me. Maybe she did. Maybe I'd been so desperate for connection that I'd handed over my autonomy, along with my money, my time, my heart. But lying there in the dark, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. At dawn, while she was still sleeping, I started packing. Not everything. I'd been living light since Martha died, carrying only what mattered. Clothes, medications, my passport, the photo of Martha I kept by the bed. Everything else was just stuff, replaceable and meaningless. Trishelle stirred as I folded my shirts, but didn't wake up. Even in sleep, she looked young and beautiful and innocent. Part of me wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that there was an explanation that would make everything make sense again. But I'd seen her with that other man. I'd heard the teenagers call me an ATM. I'd talked to Pete and learned about Eric from Denmark, and God knew how many other men who'd thought they were special, thought they were different, thought they were loved. I wasn't different. I was just the latest in a series of lonely foreigners who'd confused kindness with affection, manipulation with genuine need. I sat at the small table by the window and wrote her a letter. Nothing dramatic, nothing cruel. Just the truth, simple and clean. Trishelle, this is the last thing I'll ever give you. I know about the others. Eric, the men before him, probably the ones who'll come after me. I don't blame you for being good at what you do. I blame myself for needing to believe it so badly that I ignored every sign telling me otherwise. I hope the next man feels luckier than I did. Don't contact me. Harlin. I put 5,000 pesos in the envelope with the letter. Not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted this to end cleanly, without debt or obligation on either side. She'd given me something, even if it wasn't what I thought it was. For a few months I'd felt needed, important, loved. That was worth something, even if it was built on lies. She woke up as I was putting on my shoes. "Where are you going so early?" she asked, her voice soft with sleep. "Just some errands," I said, not looking at her. If I looked at her, I might lose my resolve. I might start believing again. "I'll see you later." I left the envelope on the kitchen counter where she'd find it after I was gone. By the time she read it, I'd be on a bus heading south, away from San Juan and the community center and the children who'd never really been her students. Away from the woman who'd made me feel like a hero for 3 months and a fool for the rest of my life. The hardest part wasn't leaving her. The hardest part was leaving the version of myself she'd created. The generous Uncle Harlin who mattered to children, who made a difference in the world, who was loved by someone beautiful and young and full of dreams. That man had been a fiction, but he'd felt real. Walking away from him hurt more than walking away from her. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a real library in Dumaguete, helping actual children with their homework. The community library project is run by an elderly Filipino woman named Mrs. Santos, who doesn't wear ribbons in her hair or carry fake lesson plans. She pays me nothing, asks me for nothing, expects nothing beyond showing up when I say I will. The kids here call me Sir Harlin with genuine respect, not because they've been coached to make me feel important. I still think about those children from San Juan sometimes. Not often, but when I do, it's not with anger. They were probably real kids who needed real help. The tragedy isn't that I tried to help them. It's that my help was filtered through someone who saw my loneliness as an opportunity. Maybe some of my money actually reached them. Maybe none of it did. I'll never know. And I've made peace with that uncertainty. Trishelle never tried to contact me. I don't know if she found another Eric, another Harlan, another lonely man willing to believe that someone like her could love someone like him. Part of me hopes she did. Part of me hopes she didn't. Mostly, I try not to think about her at all. She's irrelevant to who I am now, who I'm becoming. What I learned wasn't that young women can't love older men, or that Filipinos are untrustworthy, or that helping people is pointless. What I learned is that I was so hungry for purpose, so desperate to matter to someone, that I mistook performance for reality. Trishelle didn't break my heart. She revealed what was already broken, my willingness to trade money and dignity for the illusion of being needed. The kids at this library don't run to me like I'm their returning father. They don't draw pictures of me or call me uncle or make me feel like a hero. They just ask for help with math problems, thank me politely, and go back to their lives. It's smaller, quieter, less dramatic than what I had with Trishelle. It's also real. Mrs. Santos asked me yesterday why I volunteer here, what I get out of it. I told her it feels good to be useful without being used. She laughed and said that was the difference between charity and manipulation. One expects nothing back, the other expects everything. Smart woman. Wish I'd met her 6 months earlier. I don't regret coming to the Philippines. I don't even regret meeting Trishelle, though I wish I'd been smarter about it. What I regret is how badly I needed to believe I was special to someone. That need made me vulnerable to someone who specialized in making lonely men feel special. It wasn't love that drew me to her. It was the reflection of myself that she showed me, the version of Harlan who mattered, who was generous, who was loved. Now I matter in smaller ways. I help a 10-year-old understand fractions. I recommend books to teenagers who actually want to read them. I sweep floors after closing time because Mrs. Santos is 73 and shouldn't be doing everything herself. It's not glamorous. No one calls me a hero. But it's honest work with honest people, and that's enough. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd confronted Trishelle directly instead of just walking away. Would she have admitted the truth? Would she have tried to convince me I was wrong? Would she have cried and made me feel guilty for doubting her? I'll never know, and I'm glad. Some conversations are better left unhad, some truths better left unspoken. The man who fell for Trishelle needed to believe someone could love him that completely, that quickly, that conveniently. The man I am now knows that real love is built slowly, with small acts of daily kindness, with shared struggles and honest conversations in time. It doesn't arrive fully formed with a beautiful smile and a story about needy children. It grows quietly between people who see each other clearly and choose to stay anyway. I thought I was helping a teacher. I thought I was helping her kids. But what I really did was help her maintain a lie, and when I finally walked away, I wasn't just leaving her. I was leaving the man who needed to believe someone like her could love someone like me. That man is gone now. Good riddance.